It's springtime, the sun is shining brighter, the birds are singing a little bit sweeter, and graphics cards are returning to the shelf again. Yeah, I'd say nature is healing. Today's video is brought to you by Extra. Those who have been following the channel for some time know I am all about preventative maintenance. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. RAID is not a backup, and so on. And when it comes to your credit, it can often seem far too late to get started. But the truth is, it's never too early or too late to start building your credit. Credit cards, though, can be a risky proposition. High interest rates, obscure terms of service, all it takes is one mistake to potentially ruin all of your hard work. That is where Extra comes in. Extra is not a credit card. It's a debit card that helps you build credit and earn rewards. It connects directly to your bank account and covers all of your daily purchases. Then they simply pay themselves back for those transactions the very next business day. Every month, Extra reports those transactions to the credit bureaus, thus helping you build credit in a simple and reliable way. If you want to start building your credit with a debit card, then go to extra.app/craft and get started today. Again, that's extra.app/craft, and a huge thanks to Extra for sponsoring today's video. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Over the last year, I have not done a lot of graphics card reviews. As a result, I don't have a lot of graphics cards on my shelf to be able to compare against when new graphics cards start coming in. Sure, I bought myself an RTX 3090 and an RX 6900 XT to use on a couple PCs around here, but when it comes to mid-range graphics cards, my cupboards are pretty much bare. So when Sapphire asked me to review the all-new 6650 XT Nitro Plus card, I knew I wouldn't be able to do a normal benchmark video. Like a lot of you, I haven't even seen the lower-end AMD graphics cards from the current series, those being the 6500 and 6600 XT, let alone the offerings from Team Green in the 3050 Ti or the 3060. Instead, I figured I would review this graphics card as if you followed a YouTuber's advice from 2 years ago and just bought yourself an APU instead of building yourself a full-fat gaming PC. Look, graphics cards have been scarce for quite some time, and it's not like you could have bought a mid-range graphics card recently, even if you wanted to. But this last month, we seem to be turning a corner. In fact, just browsing through Amazon and Best Buy, nearly every current generation graphics card is in stock at retail price right now if I wanted to buy one today. With that in mind, I'm going to review the 6650 XT against a Ryzen 3400G with an onboard Vega 11. 2 years down the road, what games are playable on the APU, and what games do you absolutely need to have a discrete graphics card for? My test system for today is an ASRock B450 HDV motherboard running a Ryzen 5 3400G 4-core 8-threaded CPU. I have 16GB of ADATA XPG 3200MHz DDR4 memory and a 2TB Gen 3x4 NVMe drive from Silicon Power. Of course, what made the system a gaming PC without the graphics card was the onboard Vega 11 on that 3400G processor. This had, believe it or not, 11 compute units of Vega graphics that could clock up to 1400 MHz on the GPU core and share up to 4GB of your DDR4 memory. For cooling, I'm using the stock Wraith Spire included with the 3400G processor, as well as a trio of 120mm F12 fans from Arctic, all inside of an Inwin 301 Micro ATX chassis. And before the comments get into me about the airflow inside of this case, keep in mind this CPU only has a 65-watt TDP, meaning you don't actually need a lot of airflow to keep it cool. In my testing today, I saw a max temperature of 60 degrees when I was using the APU and 67 degrees when I added in the discrete graphics card. That's not too shabby for a case with essentially no intake on the front of it. And yes, I did all of my testing with the glass panel in place, just to be sure. Moving on to the graphics card, today I'm going to be taking a look at the Sapphire Nitro RX 6650 XT, which was built on AMD's 6nm RDNA 2 architecture. Think of these refreshed 6050 series cards as RDNA 2 Plus, getting a slight FinFET shrink from 7nm down to 6, and a slight boost in clock speeds to go along with it. Compared to the 6600 XT, things are pretty equal when it comes to specs. Both cards are based on the Navi 23 die layout with 8GB of GDDR6. We do see a bit of a bump in the clock speeds from 2589 MHz on the 6600 XT to 2694 MHz on the 6650 XT. We also have a bit of an increase in the memory clock as well, going from 2000 MHz to 2190 MHz. Other than that, it seems to be business as usual, with both cards running on a PCI Express X8 interface, with 2048 shading units, 128 TMUs, and 64 ROPs on that Navi 23 die. Of course, the elephant in the room is still going to be the asking price for this graphics card. While the 6600 XT debuted at $379 US, the 6650 XT is going for $449. While it is bound to be a faster card, given the market that we're in, a price increase is pretty much to be expected. However, even at $450, I was not disappointed with the performance out of this card. Personally, I'll be very curious to see where other reviewers place this card in regards to the entire lineup from AMD and Nvidia. Taking a look at the 6650 XT Nitro Plus card, I really like the metallic finish they've gone with here. The brushed aluminum face and backplate would look right at home in a Mac Pro tower. There also seems to be some inspiration from Nvidia's 3000 series founder cards, with the backplate partially cut away, allowing air to pass completely through the heatsink and up into the top of the case. I really liked this cooler design from Nvidia, and I see no reason why it wouldn't work on the Sapphire Nitro Plus. One thing I'm not in love with is the triple slot design of this card, but I think that's a trend I'm just going to have to get used to. Regardless of my feelings on the space that it takes up, it definitely does a fantastic job keeping the card cool, with the GPU peaking at just 67 degrees under full gaming workloads. A couple other notable features are the RGB behind the Sapphire logo and the addressable RGB header near the back of the card. I like that more and more graphics card manufacturers are including addressable RGB headers on their graphics cards in order to keep other RGB components synchronized inside your system. Also, as is pretty standard on most Sapphire Nitro Plus cards, this is a dual BIOS enabled GPU, meaning you can overclock or even flash the card to your heart's content, knowing that you will always have a second BIOS available if you need it. Moving on to performance testing. We've already gone over the test system, but how am I going to be comparing performance on two very dissimilar graphics processors? As the Vega 11 is nowhere near a top-flight graphics card, I'll be testing everything at 1080p low settings when it comes to the APU. Seeing as the 6650 XT should be a significant performance increase, I will be testing all games at 1080p ultra settings just to see how much better a discrete graphics card can be. Also, they said it is for 1080p FHD gaming right there. So, let's put their money where their mouth is. If you were to build the system today, it would cost right around $1,050 all in. I would, however, swap out the 3400G for a Ryzen 5 5600G, as that would be a much higher performance CPU with 6 cores and 12 threads for only around $40 more, and it would bring your build total to right around $1,100. If you wanted to go for an Intel-based system, the Intel i5-12600K is also a fantastic 6-core processor available in that exact same price range. So that should do it for all the introductions. Let's go ahead and get into the performance testing and see how each game did. Borderlands 3 is the one benchmark where I seem to have encountered a CPU limitation. While the game was definitely playable with the Vega 11 graphics, averaging 47 frames per second, the CPU simply could not keep up in some more demanding areas, dropping down to as low as 15 frames per second. While upgrading to the 6650 XT definitely improved performance up to 115 frames per second on average, we still saw CPU spikes of 100% and drops down into the low 30s. Stuttering on this game on certain PC hardware has been documented since the game's release a couple years ago. While I did disable the common settings that would cause this issue, like texture streaming or echo chat, I was still disappointed overall with this game's performance, especially considering the Aya Neo Next with Vega 8 graphics was able to play this game at 45 frames per second, albeit at 720p. Just like most of my recent benchmark videos, Cyberpunk 2077 was among the worst performing titles on this list, averaging just 22.1 frames per second with a low of 11.8 on the Vega 11. Even though nearly every graphical extra was disabled in this game, the use of very high texture resolutions, combined with no texture fade out for distant objects, results in subpar performance even on this APU. Though I will give this to CD Projekt Red. Even though the game plays like absolute garbage, it remains one of the most beautiful titles in my benchmark list. Stepping up to the RX 6650 XT, we see the game is very easily playable at 93.5 FPS on average at high settings. We also see low frame rates of just 39.5 frames per second, making this an extremely smooth experience on this PC. What's more, Cyberpunk is one of the few titles to take advantage of the 8GB of video memory on this card, using upwards of 6.5 GB at some points. Despite the lofty system requirements, the Ryzen 5 3400G ticks right along at between 70 and 85% utilization in this game. While that utilization is still quite high, the 3400G proves that quad cores aren't dead yet. I really hate to say this, but Doom Eternal was a terrible experience on the AMD Vega 11 graphics chip, averaging just 25 frames per second with a 0.1% low down to 14. Now, we were on high settings in Doom Eternal, but keep in mind that high is also the second lowest preset in this game. Think of this more as a medium low. Moving to the 6650 XT, we see the discrete graphics card flex its muscles, averaging a full 192 frames per second with a 0.1% low of just 99.8. That's right, even the slowest frame times in this game managed to be 4 times faster than the best Vega 11 could offer. This was also at 1080p Nightmare presets, which is the second highest preset this title offers. The latest Souls game is definitely making a name for itself as one of the most played titles of 2022. It's also proving very difficult to run on lesser equipped PCs. Here, the Vega 11 managed just 21 frames per second with a 0.1% low of 14.5 at the lowest possible settings. And I'm pretty sure Low Spec Gamer would like to know my location now. Regardless of your feelings of how playable that frame rate is, the game also looked like hot garbage at this preset too. Shadows shimmered in the treetops, and textures faded in and out of obscurity. Elden Ring on the Vega 11 manages to make The Witcher 3 and Doom Eternal look like masterpieces on the Nintendo Switch. There's no game in recent history that I can recall that scales quite as well as Fallout 4 does. At 1080p low settings, and with the distance slider scaled to maximum, we see the Vega 11 average 44 frames per second with dips down to 17.5. This game holds up graphically as well even at these low settings. Bumping everything up to maximum settings on the 6650 XT sees us only jump up to 57 frames per second and have similar lows of around 20 FPS. Sure, graphically it's a little bit prettier, but gameplay really didn't improve all that much, even after adding in a $450 graphics card. As surprising as it is, if you happen to have a Vega 11 and you only play Fallout 4, this probably isn't the upgrade for you. Project Cars 3 performed amazingly well on my Vega 11, averaging 41 FPS with a 0.1% low of just 30. Even in a 24-car grid, the game remained smooth and playable while at high speeds. Racing games are unique in that you don't need a lot of eye candy to get a great experience. A sense of speed and good enough looking textures are enough to make the game look fantastic, so long as you keep moving and stay out of the bushes. That being said, the 6650 XT nearly doubled our average frame rate up to 77 FPS. We still had a 0.1% low of around 30 frames per second, but this is at max settings with all the eye candy enabled. Just like in first-person shooters, reaction time can be the difference between 8th and 1st place in racing games. At least that's what I'm going to blame my first couple finishes in this benchmark run on. Red Dead Redemption 2 managed 29 frames per second on the Vega 11, putting it right on par with the original Xbox One as far as performance goes. This was at 1080p, with the performance balance slider at about 1/3 of the way up. However, I have to say the game definitely did not hold up graphically with such low settings, with ground textures in particular looking absolutely dreadful. Not like it should be any surprise, but the 6650 XT came to the rescue again here, bumping up our performance and graphical settings significantly, all while averaging 97 frames per second. While the game was definitely playable on the Vega 11, this is how the game should look when rendered properly. I will always say that playing a game is better than not playing a game, but I don't know how much more I could stomach looking at the nightmarish textures and shading in this game, even with as great of a game as it is. Wreckfest is a game that proves just because you buy a new graphics card doesn't mean you get to automatically crank every single setting up to the max. While this game was surprisingly playable on the Vega 11, the RX 6650 XT didn't manage to improve on that much after increasing the detail. The game is surprisingly good looking at low settings, and the Vega 11 managed to keep up at 52 frames per second. In fact, it also managed a 0.1% low of just 32, meaning overall this was a smooth and consistent gameplay experience. The same cannot be said of the 6650 XT. While our average frame rate did jump up to 72, the 0.1% low fell all the way down to 18. If I had to guess, this would have to do with the particle effects being cranked all the way up, as anytime there was a lot of smoke and debris on the track, my frame rate would absolutely plummet. This was especially noticeable at the beginning of the race with all 24 cars in the frame. If you are planning on playing this game, I would drop the settings for particle and smoke effects down just a hair to be able to maintain a higher frame rate. Overall, I have to say I'm happy with the performance out of the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6650 XT, as basically every game on this list performed at 60 frames per second on average at 1080p max settings. One thing I didn't mention during this benchmark though was the noise coming from this card, or rather, how little noise it actually made. If you had built this system with a Ryzen 5 3400G and were just gaming with the Vega 11 graphics, you were used to a 65-watt processor that produced pretty much nothing as far as fan noise goes. Adding in a graphics card with upwards of a 225-watt TDP, you might expect the system to get significantly louder. But you'd be wrong. In reality, I couldn't tell the difference between the system running with just the APU and the system running with the 6650 XT installed. The PC was deadly silent with just the Vega 11 and remained as such even with a discrete graphics card. And I should once again point out that the graphics card peaked at just 67 degrees Celsius while gaming. Our CPU temps did increase when adding the discrete card from 60 up to 66 degrees, but that's still well within the defined specs for the 3400G. So, where does that leave us? Obviously, running a discrete graphics card is always going to be better than running on an APU. But if you're one of those poor unfortunate souls that built yourself an APU expecting to be able to buy a graphics card in the last 2 years, your time may have finally come, and the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6650 XT is a hell of a graphics card for 1080p gaming. Whether you're upgrading an APU-based system or building a brand new gaming PC, if you're interested in picking up the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6650 XT, or any of the other parts I showed off in today's video, I will have affiliate links for everything down in the video description. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. You can also support the channel by heading on over to craftcomputing.store and picking yourself up a pint glass or an official Craft Computing t-shirt, although the pint glass is way cooler. That's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Beer for today is from Matchless Brewing Company out of Tombwater, Washington. It is the Rainbow Jetplane Hazy IPA, clocking in at 6.5%. Matchless is one of those breweries that no one ever remembers or probably even knows about. Basically, everything that I get from them is just solid. Like, every single beer I've ever had from them is pretty darn good. So this is using Nectarone, Nelso Sauvin, Eldorado, and Wakatu hops, Pilsner and malted oats for grain. It's using juice yeast, and the descriptions are bright, juicy, and full spectrum. Something I like about Matchless is they include some tasting profiles with it. Man, is there such a thing as a Northwest milkshake IPA? Because that's exactly what this is. This is super creamy and rich and juicy. And I really like the new leaf that's being turned over with a lot of hazy IPAs. Whereas, I've said this time and time again, if you've had one hazy IPA, you've pretty much had them all, because after about 4 ounces, they all taste like that acidic, super tropical, yet burning feeling. A lot of more modern hazy IPAs have evolved into the juicy IPA, the tropical bomb IPA. And I think we're all better off for that. This is like pineapple and passion fruit, a little kick of orange juice in there. And it's just a fantastic, juicy, yet very thick and clingy IPA. It's a very interesting hop profile, and I really like that hazy IPAs are no longer just all the same beer. They've got some different characteristics, and each one of them is starting to stand out on its own. I'm fully behind that trend, and I hope it continues into the future. Cheers, guys.